Good morning, all. I just had a long discussion with my friend and ally, Pat+Jude, on which day of the week it is. And he correctly diagnosed that after some thought, it was Thursday. You're sure about is that?
It's
You're going to
Thursday,
stick with
Jude,
that, or are you
yes.
going to twist, Pat?
Well, no, we'll stick with Thursday.
Going to stick with Thursday.
No, what's
Okay.
confusing us, Jude, we're doing it a day early.
Aye. It's an early treat for our listeners and our viewers, right? I was accused last night, of being the person who did this weekly podcast with Pat+Jude. And I said, that's not true. That's not true. I said, it's a bi-weekly. Is it bi-weekly?
I see. I heard on, Jude.
It's a bi-weekly once every 2 weeks.
Hold on, I see. We could never figure that out. The Derry Journeys come out on a Tuesday and Friday.
Aye.
We could never figure out, should you say, as a bi-weekly, something comes out every 2 weeks, or something comes out twice a week. So we used to say the twice-weekly publication.
Very good. That's a bit like the guy who, I wasn't sure what the plural of mongoose was. So he's writing a letter. So he says, dear sir, please send me a mongoose. And while you're at it, send me another one. Anyway,
Mongoose.
enough of the merry quips. Let's get down to something really funny. And that is the emergence of Jeffrey, the reformed man, who's going to go back into Stormont. Now, let me say a few things first, Pat, and then you can tell me whether I'm right or wrong.
Go for it.
I would say that Jeffrey has been, for the last 48 hours or so, putting lipstick on the proverbial pig. He says, we've got the green lane. It has been abolished. It's now the UK internal market something. He says there are no checks on these goods. So I have a question, Pat, maybe you could answer it. If there are no checks on what was the green lane and is now the UK internal market lane or whatever, can I put my goods, supposing I'm living in the north, or I'm living in England, can I put my goods that I'm planning to go send to the EU, can I put those on the UK internal market to a friend of mine who lives in, say, Derry or Tyrone or whatever, and then my friend then gets the goods and then walks across the border and sends them on into the heart of the EU? Is that have I got that wrong? I think I haven't. I don't think I have.
I'm not sure. See, when it comes to detail, my understanding, no, maybe you want to continue on. Do you want to continue on?
Let me say one or two other things, Justin. We'll come back. He also says no routine checks.
Yeah.
See, that doesn't make sense. That's another way of saying there are checks, because otherwise, why put the word routine? In other words, you'll not.
No, he said, no, hold on, Jude. He explained that yesterday because I heard him on the news. He says what he means by that is other than the usual checks for smuggling or drugs or something like that.
How will they pick stuff?
Random.
So there will be checks.
He says there are always been. No, he said. Remember, he said originally no checks, and then he rephrased it because he said there have always been checks on things coming in on random on the basis somebody's smuggling or there's drugs or something like that. So he couldn't turn around and say there's no checks because there are random checks.
Well, how would they select? You see, if you stop to think about it, how would they select?
I presume they work on the basis of random. Jude, they would have to do checks no matter coming in. Sure, somebody sitting in Bradford puts a kilo of heroin inside a box, sends it to Northern Ireland. If there's no checks, there's always been checks for things like that.
Yeah. Well, the question is, how do they know? How do they know?
They don't. It's random. It's always.
So you've got to do checks. Yeah. So in other words, it's random.
Yeah. But he says it's what he. I think. Well, but hold on, Jude. I think what he's suggesting is these checks are no different from what checks would be at Liverpool Airport or a port at London, the port at London or whatever. But there are no new checks now because of this internal market thing.
Well, do you know what the new checks were that are now abolished?
No, I presume no. You see, there were going to be additional checks. Remember the red lane and the green lane? Apparently, there were supposed to be random or checks. No, very regular checks on the green lane for stuff coming in, staying in Northern Ireland. Now he says
As you
there,
might have at an airport, say, in the Green Lane.
you might have at an airport. Now he says those are basically it will be under the internal UK trading system. In other words, it's basically the same anywhere else, but there's no additional. Under the EU law, we're supposed to. This is my understanding. The claim was that there would be more checks, but now it's going to be exactly the same as you would find at Liverpool or London or Glasgow, as the same in Belfast. Now that, Jude, I'm open to correction, but that's the spin Jeffrey's putting on it.
Mm. And is he saying that the EU will not have a hand in any of these checks?
No, and apparently the EU there's been some sort of nod and a wink saying the EU is only concerned with anything that's coming into Northern Ireland that's going on to the Republic, and that they're going to use this trusted trader scheme. And if they find that you have abused the system, that you can be taken to court and jailed and fined.
But the only way you could know if you're abusing the system is to check you.
Yeah, but there'll probably be some random checks, custom checks. Jude, you see, the problem is there's always been custom checks. See, that's rubbish that there haven't been checks. Jude, that's rubbish. There's always been checks.
Yeah, he admitted himself, I think, or somebody admitted it for him, that whenever the Act of Union was passed, was it 1801 or whatever, that if you were sending a bottle of Bushmills from Northern Ireland to the UK or to Britain, they had to pay £3 surcharge or something.
Yeah.
Something in the very beginning, there's been a difference, and there always was the animal tests and the mad stuff.
Exactly.
We know that ourselves.
Remember foot and mouth, Jude? There were different rules in Ireland and all of it, all Ireland, and everybody, Belfast and Dublin, all agreed it was necessary.
Oh yes, I remember Paisley emphasising these are Irish cattle. They're not. They're not.
I can tell this. I remember Hume coming and telling me that Hume out in Brussels came to him one day. The Republic had got some deal, a deal for their agriculture, and Paisley came to Hume and said, "John, hey, come on, let's see if we can get this deal for all Ireland. All Ireland." And I said to him, "Why don't you go public and say that Paisley wants the same deal as Irish farmers?" He says, "I'm trying to build a relationship with them, and that will just blow it out of the water." But even then, unionists admitted that there was some things that were better on an all island basis.
Aye, and they're also if they were honest, they'd say there always was checks of various kinds. I mean, coming across here. Anyway, the 7 tests. I've never got my head around the 7 tests, but I listened very carefully to Jeffrey, and he seemed to be saying we've made progress on our 7 tests. Which is another way of saying we didn't really get all of our tests, all of our 7 tests. We got a bit of number 1, a bit of number 2, a bit of number 3, etc. Would that be correct, back in Tiber?
Well, that's Jude. What he seems to be saying is right. The Green Lane is gone, and it's now the same. And now, Jude, I'm taking Jeffrey's word here and I'm doing devil's advocate because somebody else.
No, Jeffrey's not a devil. Don't be saying that. Yeah, that's very hard.
But he says the Green Lane's gone. He says basically that means the sea border's gone and real terms. He says only the things going through the red lane will now be checked. He's saying basically they're going to enact some legislation that will ensure the unionists placed in the union and so on. They've got 3.6 billion or something, 3.2 billion, but there's some more coming. There's going to sort that out. There's going to be no change in the constitutional position. There are also some other things. I can't remember. The Act of the Union, in some ways, not going to be changed, and whatever. Yeah. And he said yesterday, he said, okay. He says, we got enough to say, right, we have now got that we can go back into disarmament. Basically, what I think he's saying is, Jude, what we're doing so much more harm staying out that they made a judgment call that they go on now at least. And he says, he says the work's not finished. We will keep working on it. And I think the EU did some sort of deal in regard to trade. They sort of said we'll turn a blind eye to certain things, easements, so on. So he's claiming that as a victory. Now, if you watch Jamie Bryson and Jim Allister, their faces are getting redder day by day. I genuinely think they think Jeffrey's got enough to probably convince the unionist population, right? And by the way, I was watching both RT and UTV, or not UTV, BBC last night, and they did Vox Pops, and they did them in Larne. And as far as I could see, there was only one dissenting voice.
Yeah, I saw
the vast majority says, "Look, I'm glad to see this thing back up and running."
I saw that. I guess that sort of weariness people have. Well, all the services are run down. But in addition to that, they're sort of weary of it. They would say, what the fuck's the point in having an assembly if you're not going to have people to assemble at it?
Yeah.
Here's two questions for you, Pat. Is, when everything's said and done, is the north of Ireland being treated differently from the mainland or the landmine or the landlane or mainland, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah.
But is there a different, are they being treated differently? Are we in the occupied counties being treated differently from people living in Bradford or whatever in terms of trade?
Jude, I have always said that. Jude, there's this
Wait.
absolute myth, for years. Northern Ireland has always been treated differently. And Jude, the one simple thing, and I made this point numerous times, I'm even bored hearing myself saying it. Northern Ireland was given a parliament in 1922. Scotland didn't have one. Wales didn't have one. For the, Northern Ireland's always been different. Northern Ireland was allowed to make its own rules, make its own laws, have its own regulations. So
Yeah.
Northern Ireland was always different. And I keep saying the same thing. When I was a wee fella, I remember seeing these ads for various things, and there used to be a wee sort of codicil or whatever word you want to
Yeah.
use, not available in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
So Northern Ireland has always been a place apart, and this
Mhm.
idea that we're as British as functionally. And Jimmy, I shouldn't go on, but Jeffrey I thought made a great point. He says some of the people, he says, who are now opposed to this deal, he says the reality is they don't want Stormont back under any circumstances, that they are deluded. They still think they're living back in a different era. And Jude, that era has gone.
Yeah,
And
interesting coming from the leader of the DUP, that kind of thing. That's the kind of thing we've been saying for some time. I wonder, by the way, did you ever over the years, long before the Good Friday Agreement, did you ever go to England and did you try to buy something with a 10-shilling note?
Jude,
An Ulster
Jude, let me
Bank
tell you something.
10-shilling note.
Jude, we were in Scotland. I think was it last year, and Rosie had a Northern Ireland, and she didn't even think of it. She, the usual one she would use in Derry or whatever,
Yeah.
we're running around, and she never thought about it. Went into this cafe outside Paisley, and she done, and it's a wee Church of Scotland cafe, lovely wee place. Went in and sitting down, went to pay for it. And the girl says, she called the manager and she come over to, she says, sorry, we don't recognize that currency. And Rosie says, what? She says, sterling. The girl says, I'm sorry, dear. So Rosie had to pay by card. She didn't even think of getting, so that's how,
That's interesting.
anyone who,
So,
and by the way, Jude, that is 100% correct. So anybody says Northern Ireland is the same as Britain, as the UK, they're talking bollocks.
okay, here's the final question on this subject for you, Pat. Will this work? In a year's time, in 2 years' time, in 5 years' time, will the Assembly in Northern Ireland and the Executive be functioning more or less normally?
Dude, unless they get reform the whole thing, that one party can't pull it down. No, there'll be something coming down the track, Jude. The whole how I can explain this, Jude. Every time it comes to a crossroads, someone gets pulled down, and I think it's getting to the stage like I would love to know how Jamie Bryson, who got about 167 votes, how he has become front and center. And by the way, those people who think he's intelligent, I would love to know what planet are they on. He's a guy, Jude, who seems to think that nationalists shouldn't have any right. Jim Allister's the same. If they think that a majority population, because now the national is the majority population, Michelle O'Neill will be the first minister. If they seriously think that they can go back to 1940 and it's as British as Finchley, and that nationalists have no right, and so on, I think they're on for a rude awakening.
Okay.
I think what might happen is in the coming days there might be some attempt to reform that the thing can't go down. But Jude, here I'll finish with it. Sir Geoffrey said the other night on TV last night. He said, if we are serious about maintaining the union, the clear implication was the unionist population is going down in size. So to maintain the union, they have to reach out. And if they follow Jamie Bryson and Jim Allister, the days of the union are numbered, because they will totally alienate even, I keep saying, you use that term, the soft nationalists, which they will, by the way, because I have even heard, even soft nationalists, I know people who are more than happy to stay in Northern Ireland. This last while, they have got totally pissed off with what's going on. I don't know how much it would take it to piss them off enough. If a border poll came up in the morning, would they vote for it? But
Mm.
for a couple of years ago, they certainly would not. And one other point, no, Ken used to be UTV's
Oh, aye.
uh,
I
political
know.
I, I, Ken said, that this constitutional and before 2016, that the constitutional question almost, was on the back burner. People were quite happy living in Northern Ireland because both communities felt sort of at ease. And he says, so along came Brexit, and he says, bang, everything just went up in the air.
Well, I would agree with him in terms of when Brexit came, things went bang.
Ken
But
Reid, by the way,
I
Ken
don't
Reid.
think I don't think it would be accurate to talk about pre-2016, where everybody was saying, and soft nationalists were saying, sure, we're okay and it's grand here and my free teeth and all the rest of it. I don't think I would tend to take the Joe Brawley line in this. Almost immediately after 1998 and the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, there was a grudging quality. There was a kind of a fortress mentality among unionists, and that conveyed a message to nationalists of all kinds. And I'll be honest, I don't think they're going to change. I don't see Jeffrey being able to transform things. However nice a wee guy he is, I can't see him thinking he can transform things so quickly that, we'll all, or a lot of us, nationalists, soft nationalists,
No,
will
no,
be reconciled with the
see,
North. Hmm?
no, I agree with you totally. I don't think it's changeable now. In
Hmm.
fact, I think probably views are, dude, since 2016, there's been a sea change. I can see it even in people that I would consider very moderate nationalists.
Hmm.
They're definitely becoming sort of, look, we're not putting up with this. And I think the DUP's absolute arrogance and selfishness, they went for the hardest Brexit
Yeah,
possible. They
yeah.
ignored the majority here. And I think that was a wake-up call for a lot of nationalists.
Yeah.
Nothing's changed.
Well, when you say nothing's changed, then maybe we'll move on. I'd like to talk a wee bit about Jimmy Bryson. But before that, Ben, I've forgotten his second name, Ben, the editor of the newsletter, was asked,
Lowry,
what's his second name?
Ben Lowry, Ben Lowry.
Larry. Why didn't I remember? Right. Larry was asked about the First Minister being a Republican and being a woman. And he said, yes. And then immediately after that, he said, yes, a Republican. And the outrageous thing is Republicans who were engaged in murderous activity and who now rejoice in it. That was the first thing he had to say about Michelle O'Neill going in as First Minister. You see, what I'm getting at is this. Ben is a fairly educated, thoughtful, a guy who can write sentences. And yet, the very first thing that jumps to mind, now, whether he was doing it because his readers would say, good man yourself, I'll buy the newsletter tomorrow, or whatever the reason was. But the first thing he said was, oh, really, Sinn Féin are murderers in disguise, and they flaunt their love and, the elevation they give to their martyrs who died. What do you think?
Yeah.
You didn't hear that, did
I
you?
think, I think that's disgraceful. Dude, I knew Jeff Martin and Austin Hunter were both editors of the newsletter. In
I
fact, I
knew
knew
Austin
them
Hunter
well,
myself,
and
yeah.
I am certain they would not have come out with a line like that. But that's a side issue. I totally disagree. Those MLAs in Stormont, every one of them is democratically elected.
Yeah.
Most of them will never have anything, never been involved in IRA, never involved in violence, never involved in anything. It's like watching the Palestinians and the Israelis. The Israelis seem to think that anybody on the Palestinian who resists their subjugation and oppression is a terrorist. Dude, I don't buy that for a second. Right. The second thing, I don't agree. I've never agreed with violence, never agreed with IRA, but this absolute rubbish that 50 years of Union State, when people rose up against it, that those people were terrorists. You can take it any way you like. So people like Ben, when Martin McGuinness said once he found a democratic way, and that was the Good Friday Agreement, he said right, we now use politics and use them legitimately. There's so many people. This idea that people in the nationalist community are some sort of psychopath and enjoyed violence, I find that offensive, actually.
Well, it is again. It comes to this thing about celebration. That they don't just commemorate, that they celebrate or glory in what these IRA men or IRA people did.
Jude, can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question? See, Bobby Sands, here's a man who went on hunger strike and died for what he believed in. Uh, Does do you think that makes him a terrorist?
Oh, well, I think you would find that unionists would say, yes, he was a terrorist. They'd say that's why he was in there. He was caught with a gun, or maybe he shot somebody, I'm not sure. But they would say he
Yeah,
was a terrorist. He was in jail because he was a terrorist. Now, whatever he
yeah,
did, if he wanted to starve himself to death, that's fine. It's a stupid thing to do, but he was a terrorist. I think they would be unambiguous about that.
yeah. No, but that's the point. I don't. I reject that totally. I don't agree. I didn't
No,
agree
you
with
can't
these
reject
tactics.
Pat. You can't
But
reject if he was
no,
actively
but
engaged in the
hold on, no, Jude,
conflict. They have a
hold
right
on.
to call him whatever they want.
I have the right to, absolutely. I am not disputing. They can see it. Sure, I listen to some of these the really guys, and I'm going, Jesus,
Yeah,
what
yeah,
man? Like you know. But the point was, Bobby Sands grew up in a place where there was bigotry, discrimination,
yeah.
sectarianism, and all. And he made a judgment call. Now, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, in his head, he was doing what he thought was morally
That's right.
acceptable
Yes,
and morally
yes,
right.
yes,
You know,
yes, yes. But you see there's no way unionists would accept that, because if you do that, you then give a carte
exactly.
blanche
But
to
I
say
think they
turn to
should get
violence if you
yeah,
believe it. You know. But
yeah. You,
I think the reason that they really focus on the likes of Bobby Sands and the hunger strikers is that what they did in prison, as such, I I hesitate to use the word, but I'll use it. Noble, such a noble thing to do, to lay down
yeah,
your life. I'll die. I'll die in agony over
yeah,
weeks. It's different if
yeah.
I'm not going to be taken out and shot. I'm just going to die day after day after day, and my family, my mother will be there, and they'll be weeping and wondering what to do. You know,
Yeah,
I think the hunger strikes is the most important event, and I didn't even include Bloody Sunday in that. I think the hunger
yeah,
strike is
yeah,
the most important event that occurred in the North throughout the
yeah,
Troubles, and
yeah.
the most edifying, actually, because, as I say, it didn't involve violence, except if you like
Because
violence.
right now, it's some God ask Jamie Bryson and all them to go on hunger strike if they feel so strongly about the future of Northern Ireland. I
Jeez.
bet you, and I
Yeah,
invite Jamie to come back and answer that. You
yeah,
know, will you, Jimmy, go on a hunger strike to the death to save
yeah,
Northern Ireland? Well,
yeah.
Bobby Sands and his comrades said so. To my mind, now, by the way, I am putting on. I don't agree with IRA violence, and I've never agreed with.
Yeah.
But don't tell me they were terrorists.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I don't think it matters what you call them. I just say it's an attitude towards them among unionists, and I
Yeah,
don't think that'll ever change. I would
yeah,
say I'll predict, Pat. I'll predict inside
yeah.
5 years, and that'd be bloody generous. Inside 5 years, Stormont will have fallen again, and I don't think it'll get
I
over
think
that
so too.
time.
Yeah,
I don't
probably. Yeah.
think so. Well, quickly, let's move, because we're in the last 10 minutes. My God, this is so interesting and
Yeah.
exciting. The time's just flying. Okay, the man behind the wire, and you mentioned this in your note to me for today. Would couldn't we have guessed all the things that he was sending out, like our his mole was
Oh,
sending to
no,
him?
no,
Was it
but
not just a
no, no.
schoolboy
It's not
prank?
what he was. Hey, Jude, it's not what he was sending out. It's the very fact of the betrayal, the trust, the sort of dishonesty that
Pat,
somebody. Well, hold on, it was supposed to be a
betrayal.
private meeting, not a secret meeting, a
Ah,
private meeting. But
yeah.
but somebody was out to do, and according to Jamie, it was a senior member of the. In fact, he said plural. Now, I think Jamie might be trying to muddy the waters a wee bit there by doing
Of
that.
course, of
But
course.
anyway, but the bottom line, but here's the thing: somebody in the DUP in that meeting was broadcasting it out.
Yeah,
So somebody in the DUP was out. Somebody within that party was out to do as much damage to their colleagues as possible.
yeah.
So there's a Judas element. By the way, for a party that quotes scriptures, I like there's almost a sort of Judas quality in there. So maybe they can go looking for find out who done it. Now Gregory Campbell, I happened to catch two. I heard him on BBC on the radio program with Richard O'Reilly, or what we call the guy, on at about 4 o'clock, half four, and then where he said, "God help the person who when the party," he says, "I think if there's an internal disciplinary hearing,"
Uh,
he says, "I
oh,
think
I
you'll
will
have a
be kicked
massive
out.
problem trying to
Be kicked out.
defend body." But then he was on with Declan Harvey at 6:30. and he was sort of saying it's not a big issue, and don't worry about it, and don't overplay it. So I don't know why the DUP are downplaying, but that is a massive, massive problem for them because
don't agree, Pat. Don't agree.
can you imagine somebody in Sinn Féin leaking it
Oh
to
no, no, it wouldn't happen with Sinn Féin. That's true, and it was
yeah.
embarrassing for them. But I just don't think it really mattered. I think it's a distraction. Like whatever they said, we know that we don't know the names of. We know perfectly well that there was a good
Yeah, but hold
sized
on, no, but
number.
hold on a minute. Say this, that, no, and I'm only saying this hypothetically, so I don't want any legal letters. Say it was Ian Paisley
Yeah,
or Sammy Wilson,
could
and he's
be.
sitting around the table with
Yeah,
Jeffrey today. Now,
yeah.
go and tell me what's the implications of that.
Very little, because if Jeffrey doesn't know now that Sammy Wilson and Ian Paisley are his political opponents, then
Yeah.
he's been asleep at the wheel. He
Yeah,
knows
but Jude,
damn well.
so, but all right, but no, Jude, there's a more, it's been more profound than that. If he goes into a meeting with Chris Heaton Harris, and it's supposed to be and it's a private deal that he's trying to sell, and the details of it are leaked, he's getting undermined every which way, and there's no leader can work like that. So the implications of it are not, you're dismissing. I think it's quite serious.
I'm not sure that the details of the meeting came out. I think he just every so often said there's a bunch of there's so and so's, or I don't know if he named people even. Jamie Bryson hasn't given us a debriefing on this at all. He's just said, and we all know that there was a minute by minute running commentary, which was just funny, really. What
Yeah.
mattered at the end was not who said what, but what was the final decision. And clearly, Jeffrey's final decision was, yes, we'll go for it. And that's what
Yeah.
matters. I don't think that secrecy or confidentiality or trusting your comrades or whatever really matters. Jeffrey Donaldson knows who are his opponents within the DUP. He knows that.
Jude, I disagree. I think it's actually they're downplaying it. I think it's deadly serious because if sitting around the cabinet table, if somebody has leaking and sort of betraying you, the implications of that is, if any sort of deals are coming up or anything else, that are these people briefing Jim Allister and Jamie Bryson all along the way? That has got massive implications for any deal
I'm not
and
sure.
the working.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure, Pat. I'm not sure it's happened before. Anyway, okay. Sorry, I'm going to rush on
Let's
because we're
move on.
running down to the last 5 minutes. There was a friend of mine contacted me, and he was talking about the fact he lives in Wicklow, and he was writing a piece on for their journal. He's an archivist, or was an archivist, and he's writing a piece on the wife of James Connolly, who came from that area. And he said he just got interested again in the story of Connolly, which he thought had been played down to some extent, with Patrick Pearse taking the sort of the limelight. But he said as he read about how they took Connolly out in the chair, strapped him in the chair, put him in the Stonebreaker's yard, and shot him dead. He said he thought of the IDF, the films of the IDF guys, going into the hospital, seeking out the Hamas guys and shooting them in their beds. Did that comparison hit you, Pat? Did you think of that, or?
Well, I didn't think of that, Jude, but what I saw on social media as really propaganda saying these guys were heroes. They went into the enemy and shot dead. These guys were no. Jude, I think there's really this last while the propaganda has become ridiculous. They're sort of saying that UNRWA has got 15,000 or 13,000 people working in Gaza, 30,000 people in the Middle East. 12 guys allegedly, and by the way, unsubstantiated, not proven in court, Israeli say 12 guys took part in the October 7th. 12 UNRWA workers took part in the Hamas attack in Israel. Right. That's out of 30,000 people in the area. Now, Netanyahu says UNRWA should be disbanded, etc., etc. This is an organization that feeds 2.5 million people, and so on. And right, they think that that's immoral. But anyway, they can bomb to death 27,000 people, injure 60,000, send an undercover squad into a Palestinian hospital and murder 3 people. And they're getting away with playing the moral high ground.
Well,
So do you see the James Connolly thing? The shooting death of James Connolly enraged Ireland. I think the shooting death of those 3 guys, whether they were activists or whatever for Hamas, I don't give a shit. that was cold-blooded murder.
I would agree completely with that. The only thing that I'm wondering is where they, there's no suggesting that they were wounded and that's why they're in the hospital, they're in their beds.
One guy
And
was
I'm not
supposed to
sure
be
about that. Is that the case?
one of them was supposed to be semi or paraplegic or semi-plegic in the sense that he couldn't move. So they murdered a guy who couldn't move.
Well, what about the other two?
I'm not sure, Jude. They were in their hospital beds. So Jude, what they were,
And he also, this friend of mine, he also mentioned Moira Drum. Do you remember that in this scene? Where
Moira Drum, the
she was the vice
president
president of Sinn Féin, and she was in hospital in Belfast, and they shot her dead. Shot her dead.
Yeah.
I was trying to tease out in my mind, why do I find that so repulsive?
Because you're shooting dead people who can't defend themselves. There's something horrific about, you're not a hero when you go and shoot dead somebody, putting a man who's already wounded on a chair and sort of tying him up against the wall. There is something disgusting and grotesque about doing that. It's inhumane.
Yeah. I said in an email to this man, I said that, maybe it's something to do with the fact that your natural instinct with somebody who's sick or wounded is to make them better.
To tend to them,
you tend to do that. And that's what happens in the hospitals during the Troubles. They didn't check to see, was this an IRA guy or who was he? They simply tried to tend to the wounds of the person. Pat, we're out of time. Time rushes on. I know you wanted
by the way, just quickly before you go, David Campbell of the Loyalist Community Council says Sinn Féin First Minister is undemocratic. What do you say to that?
I see. What was that your word you used that begins with a B and ends with an S?
Absolute bollocks.
DUP, he says it's undemocratic because he should be sticking by the Good Friday Agreement. I'll never get this in, but I'll try.
Go for it.
When the St. Andrews Agreement was signed, Ian Paisley said, unionists can have confidence that its interests are being advanced and that democracy is finally winning the day. So how do you like them apples?
So it was all right for the DUP, but it's not all right for Sinn Féin.
You haven't got a joke like my joke last time, Pat, have you?
No. No, that was too intellectual. That was too intellectual for me.
Okay, Pat. Thanks very much.
Good luck, Jude.